Kevin, welcome to the Decision Making Studio podcast. This is going to be a lot of fun, a topic that we have not covered before. So this is going to be a great conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
First off, congrats on the book. It's incredibly interesting. And I say that as someone who's a self-professed non-Swiftie. I'm not in the demographic or anything that would have compelled me to become a Taylor Swift fan, but the book is fascinating. And so, first of all, congratulations on it.
Thank you so much. It was a really fun project to work on. And like yourself, I was not a huge Swiftie going into it, but I have to say it's after spending 2+ years with Taylor Swift, it's hard not to be impressed with what she's been able to do over the last 2 decades.
Fantastic. So let's maybe dive into, well, first of all, your background. Who are you and what type of work do you do? And then what led you to writing this book?
I'm a senior editor at HBR. I've worked for HBR for about over 10 years now, so I may be aging myself to your audience. Predominantly, I work on the book side of HBR. So I'm a book editor. I acquire books from authors, from literary agents, and help those authors shape their ideas and to shape their ideas so they have maximal market impact. So when I wrote the book, usually I'm helping authors, and now I was on the complete other side of it, on the writing side. So it was an interesting experience because I always approach editing with a lot of empathy. Writing is really difficult, but being on the other side of it was pretty eye-opening.
And what was the origin story behind it? What led you to doing it?
I have to be honest, it didn't take much soul searching. I did come up with the idea before Taylor Swift had announced the Eras Tour, so she wasn't quite the cultural phenomenon that she was. But I wanted to look beyond the songs. She's a great songwriter. I think we all know that, and that's contributed mightily to her success. But she has great entrepreneurial instincts. And I've always admired her as a business person. I've always admired the decisions that she's made. And she's built a billion-dollar-plus empire at this point. And we're all obsessed with unicorn startups. So why not be obsessed with a pop star who's done the same thing? And she's operating in an industry that's pretty brutal, right? The music industry. We tend to cycle through artists, stars, and superstars as if they're fashion trends. Yet now, 20 years into her career, she's bigger than she's ever been. And I really wanted to pull back the curtain and try to figure out how has she been able to keep winning for so long.
Yeah, there's so many super interesting lessons. And as I was reading the book, and maybe we can start with this because that will lead us into some interesting aspects. But it's the question that I kept coming back to is, was or is her decision making instinctual? Her sense of strategy, is that innate, or is it a product? I mean, where does it come from? I guess is the
I know that's the ultimate question, right? And I wish I knew the right answer to that. But after researching her for so long, I do think a lot of it is innate and instinctual. She received the Innovator of the Year award from iHeartRadio a few years ago. And she went up to receive the award, and she almost seemed sheepish about it. She said, I don't wake up every day saying, I'm going to go innovate stuff. She said, I do what's best for me, given the circumstances. And a lot of the times, the things that are right for me are things that people haven't done before. And that's really what drives her. So I don't think she's the type of person that's in boardrooms who's really strategizing. I think she's a great decision maker because she doesn't have a set playbook. She really looks at the circumstances and then makes decisions based on those circumstances.
Okay. So let's start with maybe her origin story as an artist, because it's that, I think, typifies that. And then you can maybe see some of this in action, because she started as a country music, I guess, not star, but you describe how she had to sort of break into this genre that had its set ways of doing things. And here's a teenager coming in and making records for other teenagers in a genre that's not, historically that doesn't appeal to teenagers. And so you describe some of what you were just talking about here. I'm just wondering if we could go into that sort of early period. That would be, I think, quite instructive.
Yeah, this is what surprised me the most when I was writing the book. So I wrote the book in chronological order, and I started very early on in her career. And this is her early career I didn't know much about. And she was making good decisions as a 13, 14-year-old. She had a very clear vision for what she wanted to do. She wanted to write her own songs, which was rare in country music, especially for someone her age. That's usually done by professional songwriters. And she wanted to write those songs for an audience of her peers, teenage girls. Now, the teenage girl market was not a market that country music was paying attention to. And in many cases, they didn't think that market existed.
Hmm.
Yet Taylor really persisted. And I don't blame the country music executives for thinking that, because the data did show that 80% of the hits on country radio were performed by men, and men
Right.
were played 4 to 5 times more than women on country radio. And there's a
Hmm.
lot going on in country music at the time. There was big consolidation in the radio market. So these big companies were coming in, buying up local stations. So the playlists were very data driven, and there wasn't much diversity going on in the country music radio market. And at the time, you really had to be successful in country radio to be a successful country music artist. But Taylor had a very clear sense that, hey, I listen to country music all the time, and I don't see myself in these songs, but I love country music.
Hmm.
And she did. She ended up persisting. And I don't think we'd be talking about Taylor Swift today if she hadn't been so headstrong very early on in her career that this is what she wanted to do. Because there are so many people that told her, this isn't what you want to be doing. You should be performing other people's
Hmm.
songs. You need to wait until you're 18 or 21 to release music.
Hmm.
But she didn't believe in that.
Just as you describe that, I just want to also maybe touch on something as well that I think is I've been thinking about recently, and I actually pulled out a quote from I think it's from the preface or the intro. That so I'll read it here. But it's people want an example of something working before, but I think the coolest ideas are the new ones, the ones that set a new precedent. And
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because we're in this. So I'm going to link it also back to something that is in the zeitgeist, which is this AI. And AI is all about taking data and stuff that that already exists and repackaging it. And
Mhm.
art is inherently about creating something new. And the industry that you describe is also super interesting because you have like I see in what you just described like classic executives of like any industry, music, art, or manufacturing, or IT, or or whatever, that there are these beliefs and dogmas. And in order to actually, I would I presume to succeed as an artist, you have to create art. And so that quote really spoke to me because that's actually that's what art is about. And so if all the decisions we make are just based on something that we know that works, well, maybe there's a formula there, but actually you'll slot into something that might already exist. And so she would have taken different advice perhaps rather
Yeah,
than
for
creating
sure.
something new. So
For
it
sure.
just it's an interesting because that's a theme that comes through in the book and her work throughout. And it's something that I think is super important at this day and age. Is day in which we need to explore more and break molds and things like that. So I just found that that's really interesting, and interesting that she started her career like this.
There's a great study that I cite in the book that talks about the content,
Yeah.
songs, academic papers, etc., that tend to do really well. And those papers and songs and content tend to be very conventional in a way, but have one novel aspect that really sets them
Mhm.
apart. And you could argue that's what was going on with Taylor Swift at the time. Because yes, she was trying to break into an untapped market with the teenage girl market, but she also played the part of a country singer. She had blonde
Mhm.
hair, blue eyes. Her songs were very nostalgic. She had that singer-songwriter vibe, which is very classic country music. But what was different was the audience she was trying to go after.
Mhm.
I think she very smartly understood that she had to tailor her songs for that audience. And I talk about this very early on in the book. I mean, the first story of the book is her in a songwriting room with men 2 to 3 times her age, and they're trying to push her in a certain direction. And she's like,
Mm.
well, no, that's not what teen girls would say. right? So in some ways she did fit into the country music mold, but in other ways she was really trying to push and do things on her own and do things differently. And ultimately, I think that's what led to her success. She wasn't so different that she alienated people, but she was different
Right.
enough that there weren't really other people like her at the time.
Mm. Yeah, and it's a delicate balance
Yeah.
to sort of to walk, because you then describe her pivot away from country music into pop, where that sort of, well, maybe we talk a little bit about that as well, because I think that also is an extension of what you've just been talking about and has some parallels to other things.
If you look at that decision, on paper, it seems like a bad decision
Hmm.
because we're at 2014 now. She decides to move to full on pop. She decides to leave country music completely behind. This is her 5th album. She was coming off of 3 straight #1 albums. And a big reason for her success, and she's a superstar at this point, is she cornered the country music market and then she slowly infiltrated the pop market. She could have her cake and eat it too. It's a classic adjacency strategy of business. And you would think, since she's had found so much success, that she would keep doing the same thing, right? I mean, that's what the data would show. You should keep making country songs and you should keep making pop songs. But she decided she didn't want to do that anymore. She described it as, I don't want to chase 2 rabbits anymore. And I think she felt that her music was potentially starting to sound the same.
Hmm.
Her musical tastes were changing. So she felt that trying to chase both markets at this point was inauthentic. And her team pushed back really hard on her. The head of her record label wrote to her, and this is in the book. He says, "This is the greatest album you've ever made, her pop album, but can you give me 3 country songs?" And she said,
Mm.
"Absolutely not." That's a
Mm.
bold decision to
Mm.
make. And she's done this throughout her career. She tends to make bold decisions at times when you wouldn't think she would need to make those bold decisions. But it ended up working out for her because she did expand her fan base and she did expand her global appeal. And that would not have happened if she hadn't taken such a risk. And I don't think it would have happened if she hadn't built such a close relationship with her fans for so long. Because what she was counting on is that her fans didn't care so much about what genre she was in. They just cared about her and the music that she was making.
Mm.
So because she had spent so much time building those relationships, she was able to make that risky decision.
Could you just remind us of which album this was?
This was 1989.
Right, right.
It was
Okay.
released in 2014. It's her first full-on pop album, and it's one of the best-selling pop albums of the 2010s.
And when you described that rationale for not following through on that suggestion to throw in 3 country music songs, I found the response really interesting, and something that I want to link into the conversation as well. Could you just talk a little bit about why? When she talked about, I think I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something about, my audience would see right through this. Like this is, it's kind of insulting to their intelligence.
Taylor had built her career on authenticity and by having such close relationships with her fans. And I think her fans knew that her music was moving in the direction of pop. Her previous album, Red, which was her 4th album, had 3 to 4 pure pop songs on them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think if Taylor made an album that was mostly pop, but then added 3 country songs in there, I think she was right. I think her fans would have called her out for that. And she's built her career on making very personal music that looks into the experience and emotions that she's feeling at the time. And that's a big reason why her fans relate to her so much. And if she had broken that contract with her fans, that would have been highly problematic, I think.
And let's also touch a little bit about her relationship with her fan base, and how she, how she cultivated that. I mean, it seems genuinely like it is a relationship. Like she cares about them, vice versa, and I think there's a lot of lessons there, certainly in business, but perhaps even more broadly. Could you talk a little bit about how that even, how that started through the use of social media and the how she cultivated that.
Through social media, but it was also through the old-fashioned way.
Mm-hmm.
Her de facto manager, very early on in her career, told her, if you want to be a superstar, you need to meet hundreds of thousands of people. And that's what she did. Taylor wasn't one of these artists. We've seen this with Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish, who hit it big very early. Taylor didn't quite do that early on. She was playing rodeos. She was playing in parking lots. She was playing baseball stadiums. Her first album, she didn't have a headlining tour. She was opening for other acts. And she really made an effort to do meet and greets, to sign autographs after shows. There's a story in the book where her manager is holding a flashlight in the rain and she's signing autographs. She had a very important meeting with LeAnn Rimes. Taylor was an early teenager and she went to see LeAnn Rimes in concert. And in typical Taylor fashion, she tried to turn this into a way to advance her career. So she sent a letter to LeAnn Rimes' hotel room the night before. And the next day she's in the front row and she's holding a sign for LeAnn Rimes. And then LeAnn Rimes had a meet and greet after the show. And LeAnn Rimes remembered Taylor's name and remembered the letter and talked to her about the letter. And that had a really big impact on Taylor because she remembered how that really made her feel. And she said, if I ever have a chance to meet fans, this is how I want my fans to feel. So she did this very early on through in-person meetings with her fans. But of course, she's really scaled this through social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue she's our first extremely online superstar. Her rise coincided with the rise of social media. It started with MySpace, then it went to Tumblr, to Instagram, and now to TikTok. And very early on in her career, now YouTube was in its infancy, Facebook was in its infancy. And I hate to use the word influencer, but she used a lot of the techniques that influencers use. She used behind the scene videos. It was all about direct connections with her fans. And I think she understood very early on that her fans cared just as much about her as a person as they do her songs. And she has been fan obsessed ever since.
And I guess when as you described that story, I wouldn't have thought that you could do that with a fan base unless you yourself were you were a fan. You understand the feeling that a fan might go through, and then that allows you to replicate that, or do or create a version of that.
Yeah, I mean, she's continued to do it. I call her fan obsessed. Jeff Bezos would call it customer obsessed. And it doesn't matter how popular Taylor is or how successful she is. She seems to spend as much time trying to delight her fans as she does trying to craft great songs. And Jeff Bezos, in one of his shareholder letters, said, our customers are delightfully dissatisfied. I'm paraphrasing here. It doesn't matter how much they say that they love our product, that they always want more. And it's our job to find new ways to delight them. And that fits Taylor to a T. I mean, she's gone above and beyond for her fans. She has sent her fans Christmas presents. She has invited her fans into her home for listening parties. And she's the most famous person in the world. And inviting fans into your home seems like an extreme measure, but she did it. And we saw this at the Eras tour too. She could have played 2 hours if she wanted to. And I think her fans would have walked away feeling delighted and joyous. Yet she plays 3.5 hours. Her set list spans over 40 songs. Now that had to come at great emotional and physical cost to her, since she's playing 3 nights in a row in many cities. That had to come at a great cost to her band, to her crew, to her dancers. Yet I think she really wanted to go above and beyond for her fans. And I think her fans sensed that. And it's a big reason why her fans stick around for so long.
And she also grows with them and vice versa.
Yeah, it's another unique thing about Taylor, because a lot of artists who start off as teenagers don't make their way into their 20s. It's a hard transition to make. But since Taylor did do that, it turned into a strength for her, because especially those OG fans who've been around for so long, they can grow with Taylor. And since she writes such personal songs, every album is a way to check in with them. Here's what's going on in my life. And then those fans can relate that back to their life. And when you combine that with her social media strategies and her fan community strategies. There's a reason why those bonds feel like they're really strong. And I saw this firsthand at the Eras tour. I've really never seen
Mhm.
anything like it. I've been to Fish shows. I've been to Grateful Dead shows. I've been to so many concerts in my life. And the community aspect was off the charts for me.
Hmm.
And it was such a joyous and happy time. And I could tell that fans who were openly crying before she even went out on stage, it was more than music for them. And that's a big reason for Taylor's success is she's been able to cultivate these relationships and experiences around her music that haven't been copied. And I think in some
Hmm.
cases are hard to comprehend for people.
Hmm. When I think of the kind of classic, I don't know, teen pop sort of sensation, there are those stories of, I guess, parents who may have pushed their children into doing this, or just the whole marketing, people are just getting sucked into the whole marketing machine and just getting, getting burnt out. The same with, I don't know, child actors, or there are stories also of, uh, prodigious athletes, or,
Mhm.
young people who sort of burn out, and then, get into drugs, or, other
Yeah.
things that the careers just kind of burn out. It's just really hard to sustain and to transform, because they're almost a product of a machine, as opposed to someone who's actually shaping their ecosystem, and staying true to themselves. And I'm just wondering what your reflections are on what makes Taylor different from, someone that I'm trying to think of. There's a whole bunch of names of, of of artists who sort of come and, seem to come and go, particularly in the pop genre. But I'm just wondering if you could, what are some of the ingredients that allowed that not to happen?
Yeah, it's a great question because that is the classic story of actors, artists who make it as teens. They tend to burn out and flame out in sad ways. Taylor, from what I know, Taylor was really the driving force behind her own vision and dream. She was really the one that was pushing her parents to move to
Hmm.
Nashville and to, help her pitch some of the major labels. But I mean, make no mistake, her background does help in this case. Her parents were both wealthy.
Yeah.
Her mother worked in marketing. Her father worked in financial services. They were both very business savvy. They had the means to move
Hmm.
the family to Nashville, and the family support, I think, is critical.
Hmm.
They're still a part of her business. She runs her business like a family business. Her parents are involved. Her brother is involved. I think that plays a big role, having that support system. And she's always seemed driven by the songs themselves. Now, she does chase fame and she does chase success. But if you were to talk to Taylor Swift in a room and no one knew each other and we all had to introduce ourselves, Taylor would describe herself as a singer-songwriter. And that's why she keeps making music and she hasn't stopped
Hmm.
over these last 20 years. And I think that's a big part of why she's been able to sustain her success and not flame out so much because her top priority is always the music. She's an artist
Hmm.
first. And I think that's really important.
Hmm. I want to talk a little bit about her response to, I mean, she's not been without, there have been controversies, as there is. I mean, it always seems to me
Yeah.
that, particularly in the United States, but I guess this is a phenomenon around the world. And I mean, anyone who sort of rises to fame, we also love to tear them down, and we love a
Mhm.
redemption story. And so it makes it, I would imagine, a very challenging, especially for a young person, to have
For
that
sure.
amount of success. And then, but she's had controversies or criticisms, perhaps early on, about her ability to sing. And then there was the Kanye West situation,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
so she has a very creative response, however, to controversies. And I'm just wondering if we could talk a little bit about that, and what some of the lessons might be, that people listening to this might be able to take away as well. So just wondering if you could talk a little about the way she deals with controversies, and criticisms.
Taylor follows her career follows a modified version of Newton's third law, I like to say. For every positive reaction, there tends to be an equal or even greater negative reaction. And this
Yeah.
has been the case since very early on in her career. In 2009, she received the Best Video of the Year award at the VMAs, MTV VMA Awards. And Kanye West very famously went on stage in the middle of her acceptance speech, took her microphone and said, "I'm going to let you finish, but Beyonce had the best video of all time." And what Kanye was saying in front of millions of people is, you're not good enough. And that criticism followed for months, if not years. Months later, at the Grammy Awards, Taylor wins the most prestigious award in the industry, Best Album of the Year for her second album, Fearless, but has a pretty okay to bad performance with Stevie Nicks during the award show. And she was savaged online for having a bad voice, that she's not a great performer. And a lot of that criticism stems from the fact that she was a teen artist making music for teenage girls. Traditionally, artists who have predominantly female fan bases aren't taken that seriously. So what does Taylor do? She said that devastated her, and I understand that. She decides for her third album, well, if people are questioning my talent, I'll get vocal lessons. I'll do that. But I'm going to write this album entirely by myself. I'm not going to use any co-writers. And she doubles and triples down on what she does really well. She didn't pivot or try to change who she was as an artist. She leaned in to the personal stories. She was approaching her 20s at the time. And she ends up writing one of the most vulnerable and intimate albums of her career. But in typical Taylor fashion, she doesn't let that sit, and she doesn't let people decide that for themselves. She turns the fact that she wrote the album entirely by herself as a key component of her promotional campaign. So she turns that criticism into a moment of empowerment for her and her fans. It's almost an FU to her critics. But she executes really well because it's a great album too. So this is what she's done her entire career. She tends to take these controversies and she turns them into moments of empowerment for her and her fans.
Is there, like, I'm curious about like the Taylor technique to doing that. So like, I'm just trying to think of like, how can I, next time, I have something like that. I want to use the Taylor Swift technique, however that could be. I don't know. It could be a setback professionally, or something I'm trying to like. What can I do? We all have setbacks. What is it that I can do? I think there's a something in an artist's mindset that I'm not going to say the features. Well, the features kind of malleable, right? And I think this is a healthy way of looking. There's so many plausible futures, like wherever we are right now, the path isn't linear, right? So there's all these, which means there's a lot of raw material to shape, and create. And we often think, especially in, I think a lot of people who are my age or who maybe listen to this podcast or work in organizations where we kind of assume like our path is linear.
Yeah.
So there's a set path, right? So we have a setback and we just kind of assume, oh, well, this is where the story turns against me now. And so, and I have to walk along this path. Whereas I think, an artist might look at this a little differently and say, actually, there's all this raw material I've got, and we can create something. And so I'm just wondering what you think about that, Kevin, because as I was reading that part, I was like thinking, I want to learn how to do this for me, like, for how to work through or take whatever she's doing around controversies and apply something here.
Yeah, I know. It's such a great question. I think for Taylor, the lessons for me from that story are, it's so many times when we're thrown off course, we can try to change things up or we question ourselves. And Taylor, in that particular circumstances, that particular circumstance didn't necessarily do that. She just doubled and tripled down on what she does really well.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't let that controversy send her off course. I think that's something that we should all keep in mind. And I'm not sure if we could use this in our own lives, but what Taylor does really well is she turns it back into music, right?
Mm-hmm.
She just keeps doing the work. And I think that's really important as well.
It's interesting as well. And when I say, controversies or what have you, like every album seems like there could be like a plateau, or like you could spend some time, you could double down on just continuing along that path. But there's there seems to always be a bit of a renaissance, or like a, reinvention, um,
Yeah.
along the way, which perhaps, explains the longevity.
Oh, for sure. And this goes back to how Taylor doesn't have a playbook that she
Mm-hmm.
uses for every situation. Because early on in her career, even though now she has a reputation of being a Bowie-esque shapeshifter, she really wasn't early on in her career. Those first 3 albums of her career, I consider a teenage trilogy, and she did not change that much. She changed enough so her fans thought that they were getting something new, but she didn't change so much that she would alienate them. And I think that was critical to her early success, because especially early on in your career, I think it's more important to build trust with your audience and then to be as consistent as possible. And that's what she did. But now she is a shapeshifter. She changes pretty frequently. She changes genres pretty frequently. Each album sounds much different than the previous album. And I think that is critical to her longevity. And she's always had a knack for changing before her fans think she should change.
Mm.
And that does cause issues in the fan base, don't get me wrong, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fans, and this is very common in the music industry, we all love our favorite bands. If they change too much, we all complain about it.
Right.
But in the long term, it's a better strategy, because Taylor has always understood that complacency and stasis is the death of an artist. And
Right.
she tries her best to change things up as much as she can.
Yeah, you had a a lovely quote about that, and I think this is when you were talking about she's working with this guy Max Martin,
Yeah, yeah.
and maybe just describe who he is, but that eventually stability creates cognitive and social rigidity,
Yep.
and um, creativity creates discomfort as well. So, and you talk about this thing, the paradox of star brands as well. So you're trying to get that balance right between timelessness and without people getting tired of what it is you're doing. Um, which is, again, is just fascinating that you've got you bringing in some thinking from strategy, and then you've seen this like applied by this young artist, which is
Yeah, yeah.
is quite remarkable. But maybe just talk a little bit about that, about change and this sort of idea of stability and rigidity and discomfort.
So she worked with Max Martin for her 4th album, Red. That was the first time she worked with Max Martin. I think it's good to give a little context about Max Martin.
Yeah.
So Max Martin is a super producer from Sweden. He is, I think, currently ranked number 1 or 2 of the producers who have the most number 1 albums.
Mm-hmm.
And he's 1 or 2 of songwriters too. I think he's behind John Lennon and Paul McCartney. But Max Martin earned his stripes early in his career in the 90s, working with the Backstreet Boys, working with
Mm-hmm.
Britney Spears. And then in the 2000s, he pivoted. He worked with Kelly Clarkson on some of her most popular songs. So he's an uber producer. But Swift had built her career around this idea of authenticity, right? She was a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
Much of the promotion around her was, I'm a DIY songwriter. I'm in charge of my own career. Well, she wanted to change up her sound, and she thought she could work with Max Martin, but that's a big jump, especially from a perception standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your DIY songwriter, all of a sudden is working with this mega pop producer who is known for being an auteur type of producer. He's known for writing the melodies, writing the lyrics.
Yeah.
He's in charge. The artists are the hired guns. So Swift ran into a big perception problem.
Hmm.
And she had worked with the same producer for her first 3 albums, a man named Nathan Chapman. And she ended up making this jump to Max Martin. They worked on 3 songs together on her 4th album because she felt that the biggest problem would be if her songs started to sound the same. And Max Martin was someone who she loved his music and she wanted to try that out. And you can see this in a lot of collaborative relationships. They're really good until they're not.
Hmm.
And I think she felt that the relationship with Nathan Chapman had run its course possibly, and that she needed a positive shock in her
Hmm.
career and to work with someone who could really push the boundaries of her sound and to really help her realize her evolving vision. So she did end up working with Max Martin, even though there was this big perception issue. But that ended up working out for her because she did achieve her first #1 hit, which was produced by Max Martin. And this was her first foray into full on pop. But
Hmm.
then this would eventually lead to her next album, 1989, which was her
Hmm.
first full on pop album. So it's another example of her taking a risk, taking a bold risk and it working out, because I think the reason why she was going with Max Martin, at least as far as I can tell, wasn't for commercial reasons. I mean, I'm sure she
Hmm.
wanted #1 hits, but it did seem driven by artistic reasons. She
Right.
she felt like he could push the boundaries of what she was doing, and that's why the relationship ended up working out so well.
Would you say that Taylor is someone who's intrinsically motivated then?
That's a
Which is
great
a
question.
weird thing to say, right?
I
A
know. I
weird
mean,
thing
this is
yeah.
pure speculation.
Yeah.
I would say it's both.
Okay.
I think a lot of her decision making is the artistic side to her is
Hmm.
intrinsically motivated. And I
Hmm.
think it all starts there. But
Hmm.
don't get me wrong, she reminds me of great athletes like Tom Brady. Like she gets
Yeah.
after it and
Yeah.
she wants awards, she wants the attention. And
Hmm.
I don't know how healthy that is. And I don't know where she
Yeah.
is at this place in her career, but she has talked about this in
Right.
numerous occasions. Like she is, or at least was driven by those things for much of her career. And I don't know how positive that is.
Mm.
I imagine that it has driven her to levels of success that maybe other people wouldn't achieve if they weren't so extrinsically motivated. But the fact that the music all starts from an intrinsic motivation, I think is
Hmm.
critical. So it's a mix. It's
Yeah.
definitely a mix of
It
both.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I think about, you mentioned Tom Brady there, I'm thinking about Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Cristiano Ronaldo.
Hmm.
People who are, they almost, like, famously, Michael Jordan invents slights, right? To,
Yes. Yes.
to motivate himself. And it's just,
Hmm.
you think, well, yeah, how healthy is that? And,
Hmm.
if I had that talent, would I want to go right to that edge? Or is it just better to, you know, make, a decent amount of money, but not, just not have, just not have that,
Yeah.
your mind being so almost, yeah, as obsessed and, yeah, as you mentioned, I'm not quite sure how healthy that is, right?
Yeah, I mean, Taylor goes after #1 albums. She goes after #1 hits. She will pull out all the tricks to make sure that happens. She sells multiple variants of every
Hmm.
record. She will use every technique to work within the rules of the Billboard charts to make sure that her
Hmm.
albums chart and that her singles continue to chart really well.
Right.
So she's not beyond doing that stuff. And
Hmm.
she has been known at times to make decisions based out of spite.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's has worked out for her. Other times it hasn't. But that is a criticism of her, that she
Right.
tends to on occasion she makes spiteful decisions.
Right. Which, is very much in line with all these sort of super successful, certainly
Right.
athletes, business people. Just there's something, I think, at that level that that those people, have or
Oh
do,
yeah,
that
for
we
sure.
may not all want to we may not all want to be like that, but
But I think part of the criticism around Taylor Swift revolves around this idea. And we do, when male performers, male artists make decisions based on spite or competition, we don't think twice about it. And
Right.
with Taylor, like, we definitely think twice about it.
Right.
And she's written songs about Kanye. She's written songs about ex-boyfriends that are diss tracks, right? And she's received a lot of criticism for this. But then you have someone like Kendrick Lamar, who during the Super Bowl has a diss track about Drake, and we all love it. And yeah, Taylor definitely has the mentality of an athlete, a great performer. She definitely has that, take no prisoners type of attitude. And I think that mindset has contributed a lot to her success. But again, it's also a reason why she's been so heavily criticized through her career too.
But it's interesting that you mentioned the almost double standard around that, because when you kind of think, whoever it is, you kind of think, well, it's acceptable for a male to be like that. They're hyper competitive, and there's something people almost admire about it.
Yeah.
Whereas it in other circles, someone like Taylor Swift, it might be viewed not quite in the same way, even though they've got that sort of that competitive edge.
Yeah, I think a lot of us don't know what to think about Taylor, because when you look at her, she looks like, it's the basic white girl aesthetic. She has blonde hair, blue eyes. They see the sequins, they see the princess dresses. And when you look at the rock stars and pop stars that we tend to hold in high regard, they tend to be transgressive in some way. Think of Madonna, think of Bob Dylan. And Taylor Swift seems like she's the establishment. She doesn't seem like she's anti-establishment. But when you look at her decision-making, I'd argue her decisions are very punk rock. They really are. I mean, she makes decisions that I don't think a lot of people in her position would, because the more successful you are, I think the harder it is to make risky decisions. Her decision to re-record her older music, it's one of the most punk rock decisions in the history of music. There's a reason why no one has done this before. And when I look at Taylor, that's what I look at. I look at someone who makes very bold decisions, and I don't see someone who's conventional at all.
Can we talk about that a little bit more? What was the background to that? So she parted with her longtime label, and this gets into lots of interesting stuff around control and trust and ownership, and it seems like a really interesting case study. So could we just start from what was the context that led to her re-recording all her music and the decision making that went into it?
Taylor signed a contract when she was 15, and this is very common in the music industry, that the label holds the sort of ownership over her master recordings. So she left her label around 2019, I believe, and the head of her label, Scott Borchetta, her label's name was Big Machine, decided to sell his label. And he had every right to do that. He was a startup founder. Every startup founder looks to exit at some point. But when he sold Big Machine, he sold Swift's master recordings along with it of her first 6 albums. So he was essentially selling those albums to a private investment firm, and Taylor received no monetary compensation from that sale. And she had essentially lost some ownership and control over that music. She really didn't have much of a say on how that music was distributed or sold. And this is a classic battle between people who own stuff and people who make stuff. And people who own stuff tend to win those battles. They tend to win those wars. And Taylor was on the losing end of that negotiation. She had no control, and there's really nothing she could do. But she did have a little bit of leverage. She found a legal loophole, and she decided, well, if those albums are sold, I don't have much control over that. Well, I can just re-record those albums and gain full ownership and control over my older music. And that's what she did. She's released 4 out of her 6 old albums at this point. She's called them Taylor versions. And they're close facsimiles to what she recorded the first time. The music sounds very similar. The only difference is her voice. She's older and sounds more mature. And those albums have all hit #1 on the Billboard charts. So she found a way to undermine the investment that others had made in her older music. And that's happened at the height of those re-records. For every one person who bought an older album, 20 people were buying Taylor's version. And those albums were streamed 4 to 5 times more than the older album. Yet at the same time, because she put out that new music of her older music, she grew her fan base. She helped new fans understand and to experience her older albums. And it was a double whammy. She undermined other people's investments while at the same time she made it work for her because those albums all went to number 1 and it grew her fan base at the same time.
As you were also describing that, and as I was reading that, is so this this is term optionality in decision building options, building optionality, and is almost capturing that sort of new fan base with the older music is a great example of building optionality. And again, it's just, I keep like, is this deliberate or is this like, is it innate? Or I guess at this point it's innate and learned.
Yeah, I think it's innate and learned. I think in this case, part of it was driven by spite, right?
Yeah.
It's like, screw you, you sold my music and I'm going to find a way to claim ownership over this.
Right.
I think it was really important to her. I think she felt her life's work was sold from underneath her. And I think she really wanted to gain ownership over that music. But again, like you have to be really driven and motivated because yes, you can make the decision to re-record your old music, but that's 6 albums. That takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of resources. And I do think there's reputational risk too to doing that because she made such a big emotional plea to her fans the day those albums were sold, or at least when the news came out that those older albums were sold. And if she didn't pull it off, or if those albums didn't do well, she wouldn't have looked good, right? That's a huge decision to make. And she did it and she pulled it off. And a big reason she pulled it off is because she's so great at storytelling and building stories and lore and myth around everything that she does. And because she had built such a close relationship with her fans, she was essentially telling her fans, I know you love those older albums. I know you've listened to those older albums. I know those older albums have been the soundtrack to your career or to your career, but also to your lives. Don't listen to it. Listen to the new stuff. And they've done that in large part. And that's why I think it's such a punk rock decision, because Prince had threatened to do this in the 90s with his fight with Warner Brothers, but he never followed through on it. And no one's ever really followed through on it. She's really the first person to do this at such a large scale. And that's admirable.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you mentioned storytelling there, and I'm also, I guess, again, as a singer songwriter, storytelling is something that she has in that ability she has in spades. I mean, you look at leaders. They really, in other contexts, they really struggle to tell good stories. I mean, it's very easy to like dive into minutia and lose people and so forth. And I'm actually just wondering if we build on that a little bit with your thoughts on storytelling and how it plays into how her decisions are received, perceived, particularly amongst her fan base.
It makes a huge impact. If we go back to the re-records, the day that the news came out that those were sold, Taylor went straight to Tumblr. And she didn't use the mass media. She didn't talk to the New York Times. She went straight to her Tumblr page and wrote a very passionate, emotional, and vulnerable screed about how this was impacting her and how it impacted her in such a negative way and how she felt like her life's work was sold. She received a lot of criticism for this because people thought that she was playing the victim again, right? This is a huge criticism of Taylor over the years. But I don't see it that way. I see it as someone who is trying to communicate with their fans about what an impact this decision had on her personally. And that's what her fans expect from her. They want those personal touches. They want to know what's going on in Taylor's life. And because she put out that message, her fans really, really rallied behind her. I don't think at the time she was trying to set the stage for a re-recording project. I don't think the
Mm.
re-recordings was even in her mind at that point. But at the same time, because she rallied her fans around her, it gave her an ability to make that bold decision to re-record those albums because her fans were connected to her in an emotional way. They knew how devastating that sale was to her as a person. And they were willing to go along with her once she re-recorded those albums. Because it is a crazy idea to re-record your older albums. I can't imagine
Mm.
one of my favorite bands doing that. I love Radiohead, and I couldn't imagine listening to Kid A, a re-recorded version of Kid A. But because her fans have such a close relationship to her, and because
Mhm.
she's such a great communicator, and because she's able to build stories around every decision that she does, they're willing to do that.
So one of the things that we talk a lot about on this show, and I talk a lot about when it comes to decision making, is that we make decisions. We can make the best possible decision we can, given what we know at the time. There's no guarantee that any
Yep.
single decision works out. But if you were, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to go back in time and faced with the same information, the same context, you would likely make the same decision, regardless of whether or not it worked
Yep.
out, because that kind of optimizes your chances of success, but doesn't guarantee it. And I'm curious about situations in which things haven't worked out
Yeah.
for Taylor, and what she does as a result of that, and whether something not working out is because she made the wrong decision or
Yeah.
it was just circumstance, and what happens afterwards. So just wondering if you could touch on that.
If we go back to 2019, 2020,
Yeah.
Taylor had released her 8th studio album, Lover. And that album was a success it would be a success for any other artist. But compared to Taylor Swift's other albums, it was not a success. And the rollout was really rocky. Her first single was called Me. And it seemed like Taylor had all of a sudden lost all sense of self-awareness of what her fans
Mm-hmm.
want and need. And it wasn't a great album. And I could argue that at that point, Taylor's career had plateaued, as many
Mm-hmm.
superstars' careers do. And a big reason why it had plateaued is she was caught a bit flat footed around that time because for so long, she had a not so great relationship with streaming. Back in 2014, when she released her first pop album, 1989, she pulled all of her music from streaming services. And a lot of that was for commercial reasons. She was still selling physical albums. She was selling CDs to people who didn't even have CD players in 2014. And that was a more economically viable business model, was to sell physical units and not have
Mm-hmm.
streaming cut away from that. But by 2019, that had completely changed. Streaming, the user base of Spotify had grown 700% between 2014 and 2019. And most of her fans were streaming music. But it wasn't just about distribution. Streaming has changed the way that we listen to music. It's changed our expectations of artists. And Taylor was caught a bit flat-footed.
Mm.
And she was using a lot of techniques that she had used back in 2014. She released this album. She tried for a big media push. She tried to make it into this big event, but the internet had changed a lot of that. Streaming had changed a lot of that. So she needed to make a pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she did. During the pandemic, she ends up surprise dropping an album, Folklore. Months later, she releases its sister album, Evermore. And the big pivot for her is she used to be very, very precious about her releases. Every 2 years, she'd release an
Mm.
album,
Yeah.
try to make it a big hype-filled release. And then she'd tour, and then she'd release a new album. Well, streaming has changed the way we want to interact with artists. We have such easy access to music that we want as much music as possible at a fast clip. So Taylor changed her strategy. In the last 4 years, she's released 4 new studio albums. She's released 4 new re-records. She has 2 new re-records to go. All of those albums have reached #1 on the Billboard charts. And because she had adjusted that strategy, that's a big reason why the Eras Tour was so successful, why the demand was astronomical, because she managed to grow her fan base both domestically and globally by constantly putting out a new stream of music. And that's probably one of the biggest pivots in her career,
Hmm.
because a lot of artists do plateau after 15 years or so. And she could have transitioned into a legacy act, as many artists do. She would still be a superstar. She would still sell out stadiums. But because she was putting out so much new music, she gained so many new fans in the process. And she ended up growing into, I don't even know what to call her at this point. It's not a superstar. I don't even think it's a
Yeah.
megastar. She's really in a category all of her own at this point.
Hmm.
And a big reason for that is because she pivoted at a time
Hmm.
when it looked like her career was plateauing.
Hmm. Great example. You also touched on this in the book, and at this point in her career, she's on the trajectory to be remembered like a Madonna, or like or bigger, right? Like someone
Yep.
who's just kind of smashes the sort of any category of artist, singer, songwriter, celebrity. Is she driven by that legacy? And is there like, do you think there's like some sort of, at this point, like a bigger vision to what how she's doing her work and creating her art? Or is it something, or maybe she doesn't know, maybe we don't know, but
I don't know for sure, but it's hard to imagine that she's not driven by
hmm,
legacy. The scale of the Eras Tour was so big. And I don't think that you do what she did with the Eras Tour. I don't think you play as many shows. I don't think you play a set list that spans so many songs. I don't think you play for so long if you're not driven by something other than legacy. I think she knows what she's doing. I think she wants to belong among the best artists, the best musicians to ever do it. And yes, a lot of it has to do with her fan obsession, but I do think she's driven by legacy and
mhm,
success. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think that drive makes her push to do new things, bigger things, new ways to delight her fans, new ways to innovate, new ways to adapt and grow as an
hmm,
artist. So there's so many things that I think drive her, and the things that drive her tend to push her to do great things and not do the same things over and over again.
okay, yeah, it'd be an interesting one to watch. Like, I have to admit now, I'm much more I'm going to pay much more attention to Taylor Swift than I did prior to reading your book, Kevin.
I mean, I'll make a bold
Mm,
statement here, and
sure.
some people may disagree with me. I would put Taylor Swift among the pantheon of great music artists. That includes the Beatles, that includes Elvis, that includes Madonna, Michael Jackson. I really would. And not only does she belong among that group, but we really need to consider the industry that she's been operating in has gone through so many
Mm,
changes and disruptions over the last 20 years. And Taylor has really turned those challenges into opportunities. And she belongs among that group. She has turned herself into a cultural phenomenon at this point, and there's really no other career like hers in music. And that's
mm,
why I titled the book "There's Nothing Like This." I actually mean it quite
mm,
literally. There is really nothing like Taylor Swift that we've seen in
mm.
the music industry.
Fantastic. I think that's a good place to start to wrap up. But actually, I did want to just touch on how you researched and wrote the book. When did you have a lot of access to Taylor and her people, or did you rely mostly on what secondary sources and your own understanding of business and strategy, or a combination? Like, how did you research this book?
So I didn't have access to Taylor. We had reached out to her team, but she was very busy at the time
Hmm.
with the Eras
Sure.
tour.
Yeah.
But the great thing about Taylor is she's been so articulate and forthcoming about the
Mhm.
decisions that she's made throughout her career. So I had great access to interviews that she's done
Mhm.
where she speaks very openly about what was going on in her career at certain times and why she decided to make the bold choices that she did. So that was a great resource. And yeah, so I looked to a lot of secondary resources. And then, of course, I mean, the big part about the book, the one thing that I can add that I didn't think another author could add
Mm.
was the business aspects, right? I want readers to read along for the story. I think the story is really critical and it's really fun and it's really entertaining. But the big value add here is all the research, all the business research that I'm applying to Taylor's career.
Yeah, it's fabulous how you weaved all of that into this, and a really interesting lens to what is an iconic artist, and probably, as you mentioned, someone who will be thought of as one of the all-time greats. Was there anything that you didn't get a chance to put in the book that you would have liked to have spent a little more time on, or?
I would have loved to spend so much more time during the early part of her career
Mm-hmm.
when she was 16 trying to break out in country music. There's so much going on at the time. And there's so much about the formation of Big Machine, the label that she ended up signing
Mm.
up with, because that was a really bold decision for her to go with Scott Borchetta, the head of Big Machine, because his label, he was working for Universal Label Group at the time. His label didn't have a name, didn't have a
Mm-hmm.
headquarters. It didn't have funding at the time when she signed up with him. And that's a whole other story of how
Mm.
he did put Taylor at the head of his pitch to investors, but the amount of work and hustle that he had to do to gain funding
Mm.
is is a great story in and of itself. And I really wish I could have spent more
Mm.
time during that early part of her career because there's dual stories there. You have the story of the upstart artist who really wants to
Yeah.
break through in a market that doesn't think that there's a market for what she wants to do. And then you have the simultaneous story of the scrappy startup founder that's really trying to grow his business and needs Taylor Swift to be successful in order for that business to grow. I really wish I could have spent more time
Mm.
really delving into that period of her.
Yeah, so that's super interesting, and yeah, I agree. I would have I like to have read a little bit more about that, but again, wonderful book, and I really commend you on it. And I think we've covered a fair bit of it, and have given listeners a sense of it. But was there anything that you wanted to touch on or mention that you don't think we got a chance to do?
I think the major takeaway for me when I've been talking about Taylor Swift is don't like to look beyond the visuals, right? There's
Right.
so much to what she does that's just great decision making. She
Yeah.
really is a great decision maker.
Mm.
And I set out to write a book that uncovered how a cultural phenomenon happened. But as I was writing the book, I realized that I was really writing a book about a great decision maker.
Mm.
And I wanted to give her as much main character energy as I could in the book. I really wanted to follow her through
Mm.
her entire career from the time she's 15 all the way time to current day,
Yeah.
35, because that's how great decisions are made, right? I
Yeah.
didn't want to break the book down into a series of recipes
Hmm.
because I felt like that would do her a disservice. Decision making is very dynamic, as you mentioned, and it's really based on the circumstances. And she has made great decisions in her career
Hmm.
based on those circumstances. And she makes decisions that in many cases, I think only she would make. She makes very
Mm.
Swiftian decisions. And
Hmm.
I think that's a big reason why we won't see another artist like Taylor Swift.
Right.
We may see another artist that has another name, just like we've seen, the Beatles were successful, but we have never really seen another Beatles.
Hmm.
And I believe the same with Taylor Swift is
Mm.
there will never be another Taylor Swift.
That's great. It's a great way to wrap up. And the other thing because we talked a little bit about this whole decision making thing, and sometimes you make the right decision, it doesn't work out, but like over the course of time,
Yep.
good decision making comes through, right? And that I think is, the fact that she has had all this longevity. You don't get there without being a great decision maker. It
Right.
doesn't happen.
For sure.
So the book is There's Nothing Like This. It's The Strategic Genius of Taylor Swift. I've got a copy right here, and presumably people can get it wherever books are sold and online and
Yeah, it's out
is there,
now. It's on every
yeah,
major
okay.
retailers. You can find it in stores. It's everywhere. So wherever you get your books, you can get mine.
Fantastic. And Kevin, if people wanted to follow you as well and learn more about your work, your writing, what are the best places to do that?
You can follow me on LinkedIn at Kevin Evers, and you can follow me on Instagram at There Is Nothing Like This with underscores between each word.
Fantastic. Kevin, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much. This is great.